Okay, so picture this. I'm at a dinner table last month, sitting across from a client I'd never met before. We talk about his flight, we talk about the traffic, we talk about the weather in about four different ways. And then nothing. Just silence. Not a comfortable silence either. The kind where you can hear your own fork touching the plate and you start praying someone brings the dessert menu early.
Oh no, I know that silence. It's a very specific kind of pain.
It really is. And the worst part is, I know English. I wasn't stuck on grammar. I was stuck on something else completely, something nobody really teaches you.
Which is exactly why I think today's topic is going to help so many of our listeners, because this happens in your first language too, not just in English.
True, but in English it feels 10 times worse because you're already a little nervous and then the silence just makes everything feel bigger.
Welcome back to Rose and Jack Everyday English. We're so happy you're here. I hope yesterday's episode helped you speak a little more naturally. Today is day 10 of our 30-day B1 to B2 challenge, and today's topic is how to keep a conversation going in English. If you've ever run out of things to say or felt a conversation just die in front of you, today's episode is for you. By the end of it, you'll have real tools to keep talking, and honestly, to enjoy the conversation instead of fearing it.
And we're not going to give you a boring list of tips. We're going to tell you what actually happened to us, mistakes included.
Especially the mistakes. Okay, since you opened with your dinner disaster, let me tell you about something that happened to me on a train because I think it connects perfectly. Last spring, I was traveling from Manchester to London, about a 2-hour journey, and I sat next to an older woman, maybe in her 70s. At first, I didn't plan to talk to her at all. I just wanted to read my book in peace.
Classic introvert plan.
Exactly. But then she asked me something small, just, "Is this seat taken?" And once she sat down, she said, "Oh, it's raining again, isn't it?" And I said, "Yes, it really is." And that was it. I gave her a short answer and went back to my book. For about 10 minutes, there was nothing, just the sound of the train.
So, what changed?
I actually felt guilty. She looked a little lonely, and I thought, come on, Rose, you always tell your listeners to practice real English conversation, and here you are, hiding behind a book. So I put it down and I asked her a real question. I said, "Are you traveling to London for something special?" And her whole face changed. She said her granddaughter was graduating from university that day, and she couldn't believe how fast the years had passed.
That's a nice question because it's not just yes or no. You gave her space to actually talk.
Right, and that's something I've learned the hard way. If you ask a closed question, something that only needs yes or no, the conversation dies almost immediately. But an open question invites a story. So instead of asking, "Do you have grandchildren?" I asked about her granddaughter's graduation, and suddenly she was telling me all about how her granddaughter almost gave up during her second year, how the family supported her, how proud they all were.
And did you just listen or did you add your own experience too?
A bit of both, actually, and I think that's important. I told her that my own brother almost dropped out of college once because he felt overwhelmed, and how our parents pushed him gently to continue. She got really interested in that, and we ended up comparing our families for almost 40 minutes. It didn't feel like small talk anymore. It felt like a real English conversation between two people who actually cared what the other was saying.
See, this is what I mean. My dinner situation, I think my mistake was that I kept asking questions that were too safe. How was your flight? How's the weather? These are fine to break the ice, but if you stay there the whole time, you never actually connect with the person.
Totally. Small talk is a good start, but it can't be the whole conversation. It's like the door to a house. You need it to get inside, but you can't just stand in the doorway all night.
I love that. Can I steal that line for my own conversations?
Please do. It might save your next dinner.
Honestly, it might, because after the silence happened with my client, I panicked a little and I did something I don't usually recommend. I just started talking about myself to fill the space. I mentioned the marathon I ran last year, hoping it would sound interesting.
And did it work?
Not really, because I didn't ask him anything back. I just talked at him for about 2 minutes straight, and I could see his eyes sort of drifting toward the window. It wasn't comfortable, honestly, because I realized I was doing exactly what I tell our listeners not to do, talking without listening.
What eventually saved the conversation?
He did, actually. He noticed a small detail. He said, "Wait, you ran a marathon? Which one?" And suddenly I had a reason to ask him something back. I said, "Have you ever done anything like that? Any big physical challenge?" And it turned out he used to climb mountains when he was younger and once got stuck on a mountain in bad weather for almost 2 days.
Wow, that's a serious story.
It was incredible, and I almost missed it completely because I was too busy trying to sound interesting instead of actually being interested. That's the real lesson for me. When you ask a follow-up question, something that connects to what the other person just said, you show real interest, and people naturally want to keep talking to someone who seems genuinely curious about them.
That's such an important point because a lot of our listeners tell us they don't know what to say next. But really, the answer is usually already in what the other person just said. You don't need a new topic from nowhere. You just need to ask one more question about what they mentioned.
Right, like if someone says, "I had a rough week at work," instead of just saying, "Oh, that's too bad," and changing the subject completely, you could ask, "What happened?" Or was it just one bad day or the whole week? That keeps the conversation alive instead of closing it.
Exactly. And I noticed something else on that train journey. Every time I stayed quiet for too long, waiting for the perfect thing to say, the conversation started to feel awkward again. But the moment I just reacted honestly, even with something simple like, that must have been so stressful for her, the woman kept talking easily.
So sometimes you don't even need a clever question, just the real reaction.
Exactly. Showing interest doesn't always mean asking something smart. Sometimes it just means saying, "Really? Tell me more." Or, "That's surprising," and letting the other person continue. And actually, something similar happened to me again a few weeks later in a completely different situation, which made me realize this wasn't just luck on the train.
Oh, tell me about that one.
So I was at a friend's birthday party, and I got seated next to someone I'd never met, a colleague of my friend's husband. And for the first few minutes, it was exactly like the train all over again. We talked about the food, we talked about how nice the garden looked, and then there was that same heavy pause. But this time, instead of panicking, I remembered what worked before. I noticed he mentioned earlier that he'd just come back from a work trip. So I asked, was this trip for something specific or just a regular visit?
And that opened things up?
Completely. He told me he'd gone to visit a factory his company was thinking of closing, and how strange it felt to sit in meetings deciding the future of people's jobs. It was such a heavy, honest topic, and I never would have heard it if I just stuck to comments about the garden.
It's funny because once you notice the pattern, you start seeing chances for it everywhere. With me, it happened again just last week, actually, with a new neighbor. We were both taking out the rubbish at the same time, awkward moment, and instead of just saying a quick hello and rushing back inside like I usually would, I asked him what brought him to the area.
And?
He said he moved because of his daughter's school, and then he mentioned, almost as a side comment, that they'd actually moved from another country entirely. So I asked him about that, what was hardest about moving countries, and we ended up standing outside for 15 minutes, in the cold, both of us holding our rubbish bags, just talking.
That's such a good example because it shows the skill isn't only for special situations like a train or a client dinner. It works standing outside your house with rubbish bags in your hands.
Exactly. It's not really about the place or the situation. It's about the habit of noticing a small detail someone mentions and being curious enough to ask about it instead of letting it pass.
Okay, but let's be honest with our listeners too, because sometimes even with all these tricks, a conversation still runs out of energy, and that's completely normal, right?
Completely normal. Even Rose and I, close friends, sometimes sit together and just don't talk for a few minutes, and it's fine, because comfortable silence exists too. The problem is only when you're with someone new and the silence feels heavy instead of comfortable.
Right. And in that situation, I've learned it actually helps to change the subject gently instead of forcing the same topic to continue. At the birthday party, after the factory story, the conversation naturally slowed down, so instead of panicking, I just looked at the table and said, "This cake looks amazing. Did your friend make it or order it?" And that gave us something completely new and lighter to talk about.
That's such a useful skill, knowing how to change the subject without making it feel sudden or strange. I did that too, actually, with my client. After the mountain story, the conversation slowed down again. So I just looked around and said, "This restaurant has such an interesting menu. Have you tried anything here before?" And that gave us a whole new direction.
And I think that's the real secret behind keeping a conversation going, in English or honestly in any language. It's not about memorizing perfect questions. It's about really paying attention, asking about what interests the other person, sharing a little of yourself too, and not being afraid of small pauses.
I completely agree. And I think the biggest change for me happened when I stopped worrying about my grammar during the conversation and just focused on the person in front of me. Once I stopped thinking, is this the correct tense, and started thinking, what does he really mean? Everything became easier.
That's such a good point because a lot of English learners tell us they're scared to keep talking because they're afraid of making mistakes. But honestly, the woman on my train, probably didn't notice any small grammar mistakes at all.
Not even one. She was just happy someone was listening to her story. And by the end of the journey, you two exchanged emails, right? She even sent you pictures from the graduation.
She did a few days later, from a silent, awkward beginning to actual friendship, just because I asked one real question instead of giving up.
And with my client, we ended up talking for almost 2 hours, past a mountain story, past a restaurant menu, all the way to our childhoods. He actually became a regular client after that, and I really think it's because the conversation finally felt human instead of just polite business talk.
See, this is exactly why we wanted today's episode to be a real story, instead of just a list of tips. Because now our listeners have heard exactly how it feels when a conversation almost dies, and exactly what small changes bring it back to life. And we've shown it happening more than once. On a train, at a party, outside with rubbish bags.
Real English conversation isn't about perfect words. It's about curiosity, patience, and just a little bit of courage to ask one more question.
Completely. He told me he'd gone to visit a factory his company was thinking about closing, and how strange it felt to sit in meetings deciding the future of people's jobs. It was such a heavy, honest topic, and I never would have heard it if I'd just stuck to comments about the garden.
It's funny because once you notice the pattern, you start seeing chances for it everywhere. With me, it happened again just last week, actually, with a new neighbor. We were both taking out the rubbish at the same time, awkward moment, and instead of just saying a quick hello and rushing back inside like I usually would, I asked them what brought them to the area.
Okay, now let's slow down for a moment and look at some of the useful expressions we used today, because you probably already understood them from the story, and now we'll make sure they're locked in.
First one, keep a conversation going. This simply means to continue talking instead of letting it stop. For example, she asked good questions, so it was easy to keep the conversation going. A common mistake is saying keep talking the conversation, but that's not correct. You keep a conversation going or you keep talking. Those are two separate phrases.
Next, small talk. This means light, easy conversation about simple topics like weather or travel. For example, we made small talk about the weather before the meeting started. Learners often confuse this with small talking, but small talk is a noun, so you make small talk. You don't small talk someone.
Then we have open question and closed question. A closed question only needs a short answer, usually yes or no, like, did you enjoy the trip? An open question invites a longer answer, like, what did you enjoy most about the trip? A common mistake is thinking all questions with a question mark are open questions, but the structure of the question really decides that.
Another one, follow-up question. This is a question that continues based on what someone just said. For example, when he mentioned his trip, I asked a follow-up question about the factory. A natural alternative is a follow-up, used as a noun too, like, can I ask a quick follow-up?
We also used run out of things to say. This means you have nothing left to talk about. For example, after 10 minutes, we ran out of things to say. Learners sometimes say finish things to say, but native speakers say run out, like running out of milk or running out of time.
Comfortable silence is another great one. This describes a quiet moment that doesn't feel awkward, usually between people who know each other well. For example, Jack and I can sit in comfortable silence for hours. The opposite would be an awkward silence, which feels tense or uncomfortable.
Then, change the subject. This means to start talking about something different. For example, I changed the subject when the topic became too serious. A common mistake is saying change the topic of subject, but you simply change the subject. No extra words needed.
Genuinely curious is a lovely phrase too. It means truly interested, not just being polite. For example, she asked more questions because she was genuinely curious about my life. Many learners overuse really interested, but genuinely curious sounds more natural and a little more advanced.
And finally, break the ice. This means to start a conversation and remove the initial nervousness. For example, talking about the weather is a simple way to break the ice. A common mistake is saying break the silence for this meaning, but break the silence is more literal, while break the ice specifically means starting a new conversation comfortably.
Those are the expressions we really want you to remember from today. And the good news is you already understood every one of them naturally just by listening to our stories.
Now let's look at a few common mistakes B1 learners make when trying to keep a conversation going.
First one, incorrect. What do you think about this topic? You always say the same. Correct. You always say the same thing. Learners often forget the word thing at the end, but in English, you need a noun there for the sentence to sound complete.
Second, incorrect, I am boring during conversations. Correct, I get bored during conversations. This is a really common mistake because boring describes something that causes boredom, while bored describes how you feel. If you say, I am boring, you're actually saying you make other people bored.
Third mistake, incorrect. Can you ask me more about my life? Correct. Can you ask me more about myself? When we're talking about ourselves in this kind of expression, myself sounds much more natural than my life, unless you're specifically talking about your life story.
Fourth one, incorrect, we talked during 2 hours. Correct, we talked for 2 hours. Learners often use during when they mean a length of time, but during is used with a specific event, like during the meeting, while for is used with duration, like for 2 hours.
And the last one, incorrect. She is very curious about know my opinion. Correct. She is very curious to know my opinion. After curious, we use the infinitive form, to know, not the ing form.
Okay, here's today's comment challenge, and we really want to hear from you. Think about a time when a conversation almost died, maybe with a stranger, a coworker, or even a family member, and something small brought it back to life.
Write your answer in the comments below, in English, even if it's just 2 or 3 sentences. Tell us what happened, what question or comment saved the conversation, and how it made you feel afterward.
This is real English speaking practice, and honestly, some of the best stories in our community come from these comments, so don't feel shy. Every single comment helps you and helps other learners too. Jack, thank you friends for listening to our today's episode. I hope you learned something from it. Today we talked about small talk, open questions, and how one simple follow-up question can turn a dying conversation into something real. Rose and I shared our own stories, our own mistakes too, and we hope it helped you feel less alone in the struggle. Because honestly, every English learner and even native speakers go through this.
You're doing amazing just by showing up every day for this challenge, and that consistency is exactly what builds real English fluency over time.
Don't miss tomorrow's episode, day 11 of the B1 to B2 challenge. Subscribe now so you don't fall behind. See you tomorrow, friends.